I think everybody just needs to take a step back for a minute. I'm talking about this rhetoric that I keep hearing from lawmakers, Congress people, leaders. I can't even call them that, like with a straight face, whatever, without being snarky. Apparently, there's a growing sentiment that we need to install a no-fly zone in Ukraine, that we need to directly interfere with our military, and that it would be worth it to do so. You need to chill, because I think the majority of you that are saying this, you don't know what you're freaking talking about. When we think of war these days, because I can guarantee that 99.9% at least of you that are watching this don't remember an actual total war. The last total war that we were involved in was World War II. What I've witnessed is we've been at war, but not technically. Congress never declared war in Vietnam. Congress didn't declare war in Iraq or Afghanistan. These were military operations. So to call it a war is kind of a stretch, because we never actually declared war. Now, we did use force, okay? We used force. We used military force. In some cases, we used a whole lot of military force. And I'm not trying to downplay these conflicts by any means. Combat's combat. Now, what I'm talking about is the general scale of what we've seen and what you think you know versus war against a nation. So we're used to these guerrilla wars. Okay, we're basically kind of punching down, right? Like, we're going after people that are hiding from us and using guerrilla tactics against us, so we try to turn around and use it on them, whatever the case is. That's not total war. Maybe combat. Combat's combat. You can get killed either way. But as far as a national level and a nation is concerned, that's not war. I don't think we really understand what it entails. So we're going to try and compare and contrast a little bit. And we're also going to look at it from the nuclear age aspect, because I don't think a lot of people realize what they're talking about when they say a nuke. Our notions of war, what we've seen, and it keeps us, it's something that happens far away, overseas, right? It's something that doesn't touch us. We know that it's happening, but we don't know, like, how it's happening. We don't really interact with it a whole lot. We get used to this idea that war is remote. War is not something that affects us. The more I hear people talking about how it's worth it to go head to head with Russia, you don't know what you're talking about. This no-fly zone, we cannot do that. Okay? We just can't. Because that is suicide. That is stupid. There's no way to enforce it without using military force, and whether that be surface-to-air missiles or fighters, air superiority fighters. American servicemen and American jets firing at Russian jets is an act of war. There's no other way to see it. Now, this may not mean anything to you, but it means something to the rest of the world and the governments in the world, because it tells them what they need to do and what their next steps are. Now, let's say we do institute a no-fly zone. Russia defies it, because they absolutely would. They're in the middle of a combat operation. They're gonna defy it. We have a fighter that fires on the Russian fighter and knocks it down, or surface-to-air missiles knock a Russian fighter down, or a bomber. It's millions of dollars of equipment lost to American forces. Maybe once, maybe it just gets Putin's attention, right? What about 5? What about 5 times? What about 5 downed aircraft? Then we got a problem. Because that's millions and millions of dollars of equipment. And now he's going to be looking at stopping that threat. And it wouldn't be 5. It'd probably be more like 2 or 3, maybe even 1. With 1, he could be authorized, but I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. So then he says, okay, well, they're knocking our planes down. And we've been in combat operations now in this country for a while. So we need to stop that from happening. Because we're not going to surrender just because they shot down a fighter jet. We're going to erase the threat so that we can continue operations. Well, then that's an escalation. Now, due to us shooting down a Russian jet or bomber, whatever, now they're going to destroy the threat, what's shooting them down. So that means that American fighters are now being fired upon by Russian fighters. Russian jets are now bombing surface-to-air missile sites that are ours, and our servicemen and women are there. They're either in the jet flying it, or they're on the ground manning it. So we say, wow, we just lost, so many surface-to-air missile sites, or we lost so many jets. Now we need to send more to replace them because no fly zone, right? Like, we're enforcing it. So we send more and more. And we say, well, we need to send more than last time, because the last time, we lost quite a bit of material and hardware there. So let's try to keep that from happening again. Let's send more of it to combat. This is escalation, and it is the simplest way I can describe it, because things happen from there, and you can see how it escalates. Because then once we get more hardware in country, what's Russia going to do? Well, you think Putin's just going to say, well, you sent a lot, so I guess that's it. You sent the magic number, so I surrender. No, he's going to send more too. And he's going to be more aggressive with his tactics, and so are the pilots. They don't want to die either. They're going to be more aggressive. There's going to be more friendly fire. There's going to be more civilian casualties. This is the beginning of a war, a total war, okay? This is how it starts. Because each side is justified in their reactions. Once this kind of thing starts, war is hard to stop until it takes its natural course. It's hard to get people to the table once you've started violence. And I mean real violence, national violence. And make no mistake, these are not terrorists using guerrilla tactics. This is a nation, and Russia has some serious equipment. Some of it is comparable to ours, some of it isn't. Just depends on what you're talking about. But it is deadly. People talk about World War II all the time. They just kind of glaze over it. Just make analogies to it. They reference the history of it. Let's look at the actual losses. Not the battles, okay? Just what we lost in World War II. And I want you to take these losses in equipment and manpower that are operating that equipment and carry them over to today. Translate into modern equipment. You've never seen anything like it. I guarantee you that. How many tanks do you think, give or take, that we lost in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq? Probably not too many, right? In World War II, the M4 Sherman was the primary battle tank. We lost between 4,295 and 4,399 M4 Sherman tanks. 4,300. They aren't even sure the exact number. 1,507 M3 Stuart tanks, which is just a lighter version of the Sherman. And this is just in terms of tanks. Land warfare. We're talking about numbers of thousands and hundreds here. Naval losses, which a lot of combat happened. It's a world war. Naval's going to play a big part in it, just like it would if it was us versus Russia. When's the last time we lost an aircraft carrier in combat? Have you ever heard of it happening? An actual aircraft carrier, like the USS Abraham Lincoln. Big boats. Okay, they're pretty big, pretty expensive. They're basically floating cities. In World War II, we lost 15 aircraft carriers and escort carriers, which escort carriers are just a lighter version of a regular aircraft carrier, just a little smaller, can't hold as many squadrons. And this is combat, okay? We lost 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, 87 destroyers, 54 submarines. When's the last time we lost a submarine in combat? We lost 54 of them in total war. Between 1939 and 1945, there were 291,557 combat deaths from U.S. personnel. That's almost 300,000 people. We've never seen anything like that. Now imagine that today. Imagine losing a modern aircraft carrier in combat, just one. Because one, what's the crew complement? Thousands of people, right? These are big ships. And imagine Russian bombers firing cruise missiles at an aircraft carrier, which is the equivalent of just one of 15 losses that we suffered in World War II. Total war. I want you to really think in terms of the scale of the warfare. If we're talking about us versus Russia, this war will not happen far away. This is just conventional warfare we're talking. Conventional warfare was what World War II was all about, because we didn't have the inventions that we have now. So that raises the stakes even more. Because let's say, for instance, one side starts losing. They start losing aircraft carriers. 3 would be horrible losses. 3 aircraft carriers. We lost 15 in World War II, but 3 today would be catastrophic. Now granted, today's carriers are much bigger, much more advanced, but I think it's still applicable because at the time, we were throwing everything we had at this war. So that was what we had then. This is what we have now. So I think it's still comparable. Say one side starts to lose aircraft carriers, or starts to lose thousands of tanks, not even 4,000. Maybe 500 tanks gone. They're going to have to replace those losses. So they're going to really ramp up production. Well, the other side has just waged these terrible battles, come out on top maybe. They don't want to have to fight those battles all over again. So they're going to say, you know what? We just killed 100 tanks. We don't want to have to kill another 100. Because God knows how many they lost in that conflict. Yet the enemy is still going to try and replenish their ranks. What do? Why don't we stop the enemy from sending those tanks? Why don't we stop their production? Well, how do you do that? We have to bomb the production facilities. Who produces our tanks? Companies. In factories. With government contracts. That's what we did in World War II. This was total war. We had to bomb factories to keep them from producing more of the stuff that we just finished killing. Well, who works in factories? Civilians do. Where are factories at? They're in cities. So let's send some B-1s and B-2s, bombers, and take out their production facilities. Just 1 or 2, right? Enough to limit the supply of arms so that we don't have to fight the same battle all over again somewhere else. Okay, so now you got B-1s. Now you got American bombers trying to bomb a factory on Russian soil. Russia is going to protect their factories, rightly so. They're going to protect the sovereignty of their borders and their land and their people that work in those factories. So they're going to send fighters to intercept those bombers as best they can, or use surface-to-air missiles to shoot them down. Which is pretty effective, honestly. I mean, our bombers might have fighter escorts, so there would be, large battles, probably beyond visual range, but still, people would be dying. You get a couple of those where you don't really do as much damage as you hoped, because you may hit the facility, you may hit the production factories. Doesn't mean they're not going to repair, doesn't mean they're not going to build more as soon as possible in a very rapid manner, just to get their forces resupplied on the front line, to get those tanks to the battlefield. Well, we're not doing enough damage. Okay, we lost a B1 or B2, a bomber cost a lot of money, and we can't keep sustaining these losses. Okay, we're going to need something bigger. What is harder to intercept? How can we get the most bang for our buck? How do you think? Most bang for the buck. Intercontinental ballistic missiles. They launch, they leave Earth's atmosphere, arc around the planet in a decaying orbit, re-enter, the warheads separate from the casing, and those are really hard to intercept. You can fit multiple warheads into one missile, and they can independently target whatever you're going after. What's more likely? That we're just going to keep sending multi-million-dollar bombers and fighter aircraft and just keep sustaining 35% losses, 50% losses? Even 15% losses would be bad just for one mission. That's millions and millions of dollars. We just want to stop them from making tanks. This is only one way this escalates. This is just one way. There are many different ways this escalates out of control. And once it starts, you can't stop. Let's say, you know what, we've lost too many bombers. We can't replace these bombers. But we need to limit their production. So let's launch a tactical nuke and take out that factory. Just a tactical nuke. All right? We're talking about maybe like 5 kilotons, something like that. Small, 12 kilotons. With a low yield to limit the destruction. How do you think the Russian people or the Russian government would see that? That's nuclear deployment on Russian soil. That's a nuclear detonation. Killing civilians and severely maiming, crippling their production. No matter how you try and justify it, it's a nuclear launch on Russia. Doesn't matter how small it is, people don't care. They don't know the yields. When I say 5 kilotons, do you know what I mean? That's how we measure nuclear yield, is in kilotons of TNT. If you were to stack 5 kilotons, 5,000 tons of TNT detonated all at the same time and get a clean detonation, that's a 5 kiloton nuclear warhead, and that is small. That is what they call a tactical nuke. The strategic nuclear warheads, they're big. 2 primary warheads that we have on our missiles right now are the W-78 and the W-87. Those are installed on the Minuteman III ICBMs. See how it escalated? And that's just one way, folks. That's just one way it happens. There are many, many, many others. When one side starts losing and taking losses and they have the red button and they can justify just a little tactical nuke. The world doesn't see a tactical nuke. They see a nuclear detonation. And then the game's on. Now, these factories, like I said, are in cities. You know what else are in cities? Airports. Airports aren't just for flying you from place to place. Airports, for instance, Louisville Airport. They call it an international airport. Now, I can't hop on a plane in Louisville and expect to reasonably fly to Hong Kong, okay? It's not that kind of an international airport. It's called international because right next to the airport is UPS World Hub. Is a major airport for UPS, and they do fly international. That's why it's called International Airport. Any runway that's big enough to accommodate UPS's massive cargo planes, as heavy as they are. It can also accommodate troop transport planes, military equipment transport planes. These metropolitan airports are big, and the government can use them and will use them. That's part of the infrastructure, that's part of troop movements, that's part of deployment and getting equipment where it needs to be. Getting parts where they need to be. Even UPS can haul parts. You need to build a tank. Well, you got to there's a lot of parts that go into a tank, and those parts got to arrive where they got to arrive on time so that you can manufacture. And in wartime, when you're taking losses, that manufacturing and that transporting ramps up. If you're thinking that Louisville Airport, for instance, or any airport in any major city would not be a target for nuclear detonation, you're kidding yourself. Because in wartime, in total war, everything is related to the war effort. This is somehow connected to the war effort. So that would absolutely be a target. Don't think for a second that it wouldn't. What's downtown Louisville? Residential, sure, right? Commercial. How about financial? Credit card companies have skyscrapers downtown. And this is just Louisville. This is the 17th largest city in the nation. There's a lot more financial districts, a lot bigger financial districts in other cities. Much bigger. These companies that are making this stuff for the war effort, they're not doing it for free. There's a lot of financial transactions happening for parts, for armor, for equipment. So if you can take out the infrastructure for moving things where they need to be, and also the monetary incentive for companies to even get the equipment in the first place, you're going to target financial districts too. So what would that look like? This is where it gets real grim. Real grim. This is Louisville. As you can see, this is downtown. All right. And Louisville's pretty big, you know, it reaches out. This is a lot of residential. A lot of it's residential or commercial. Downtown's a little bit different story. It's where the skyscrapers are. If you look here, this is the airport. If you want to get downtown, knock out the financial district, you want to knock out the airport as well. Let's say one warhead, 300 kilotons. Modern day example of a strategic warhead would be about 300 kilotons. That's what the W-87 warhead is on the Minuteman III. Okay, that's just one of ours. Russia's are comparable. One warhead detonated between downtown and SDF in an airburst configuration, because you do not detonate your nuclear warheads on the ground. The shock wave is dissipated and reflected into the air. You want maximum destruction. If you're going to use it, you got to use it. What would that look like? Do you know what it would look like? This is a program called Nuke Map. So we're going to find out exactly what it would look like and detonate. Can you see that number ticking up? There we go. Estimated fatalities, 53,780. This is a regular strategic warhead. 109,670 injuries. Instead of 200 feet, let's go to 1,000. That's pretty standard for an ICBM. So what does this big circle mean? When a nuclear weapon detonates, you split one atom. You get energy expelled from that in the core, causes a chain reaction of other atoms in the same core to split. You're not just splitting an atom and getting a giant blast. Okay, it's a chain reaction. There are a lot of atoms being split, causing a chain reaction within the core that consumes it and transforms the material into something else. Usually X-rays and gamma rays, because atoms don't want to be split. They want to stay together. When we forcibly cause them to split, transforming one material into another material. There's a lot of energy that's released when you do something like that, and it's released in the form of heat. This yellow ring is the fireball. Okay, so at the time of detonation, after the chain reaction has occurred, the nuclear fireball forms. Now, this fireball, it's kind of a dumb word for it, because what it is, it's a superheated ball of plasma with a radius of 0.6 kilometers from a 300 kiloton nuke. This is plasma, ladies and gentlemen. It is hotter than the surface of the sun, and it forms on Earth. Now, anyone inside of this yellow circle right here, have you ever turned the stove on high and then like accidentally spilled some water on the burner and it just snap evaporates, just sizzles, and then it's gone, right? That's what would happen to almost everything there. People, you just got dropped on your water on a hot burner. You know the term vaporized. This is literally being vaporized. You are going from what you see now being flash boiled in less than a second. It happens so quickly that the pain receptors don't have time to relay that information to the brain, so you don't feel anything. You are there, and then you are split in your component elements, poofed out of existence. A nuclear fireball, and the plasma still has mass, and it forms instantaneously. All of that air cannot be there any longer. So it has to go somewhere, or it has to convert to plasma. A lot of it inside the fireball will convert into plasma, right? Like it'll just burn. It can't get out of the way fast enough. So it just turns into energy. The stuff that can move will move. The air that can get out of the way will get out of the way. And it will get out of the way rapidly. Air blast radius for 3,000 psi, pounds per square inch of pressure, is this right here. Now, we're looking at these circles and you're seeing a map underneath, right? Let's change that, because a map doesn't show you what's really there. This does. Those are neighborhoods, houses, all within the fireball radius. Gone. Roads, that's an interstate. A couple of factories in there, lots of houses, a park, vaporized. All of that from a 300 kiloton nuclear warhead, standard strategic warhead. And that's all flash boiled out of existence. Now, before you even got to worry about the blast wave, okay? The blast wave is secondary to the heat that's generated in this giant circle. That's the thermal radiation radius. So after the time of detonation, you have what is called a thermal pulse. This thermal pulse is hot enough that anything within line of sight of the detonation will burn. If it can burn, it will burn. That includes people, wood, structures, plastic. This causes third-degree burns, obviously. It can also just straight up kill you. Anything exposed to that thermal pulse will burn. That goes all the way out across the river, Jeffersonville, Indiana, downtown Jeffersonville. People will suffer third-degree burns if they just happen to be standing at a window, if they happen to be standing outside. Not to mention the intense flash that will happen if people just happen to be looking in the general direction of the detonation. They'll be blinded. It's that intense. Now, the overpressure wave is what happens next. All of the air that was inside of the fireball has to escape or convert. The stuff that doesn't convert gets out of the way. It gets out of the way faster than the speed of sound. Okay, so that air becomes much worse than any hurricane or any tornado we've ever experienced. You're talking about 700, 800, 900 mile per hour winds. That's the blast wave. This will pulverize people, buildings, cars. Any iron or steel reinforced concrete can withstand it somewhat, but you'll still have weaknesses where even that will collapse. If you can imagine the devastation that you've seen from houses, that you've seen on the news and hurricanes, that's no comparison to this. That's not even, this is orders of magnitude worse. Wind faster than the speed of sound. We can't imagine it. Because in the face of that, you are dust on the wind. You are totally at the mercy of that. All of this weight, all of this oxygen, atmosphere that's now been pushed out of the way, it'll do its thing until it equalizes pressure with Earth's standard atmosphere. Once it gets to the point where it weakens and equalizes, then all of that air has to come back in. It has to refill the area that it just left because there's no longer a reason not to be there. So again, it will equalize towards the center. So you'll get strong winds the opposite direction. So everything that was burnt by the thermal pulse, if it was ash or, cinder, or just barely hanging on, just from the heat damage of the detonation, it will literally be ashes in the wind to both of these effects, the outgoing and incoming. You're going to get both. Now, this also supplies oxygen back to the area. Oxygen is fuel for fire. There will be a lot of fires from the thermal pulse. Remember, the thermal pulse, anything that can burn within range of the thermal pulse will burn. That includes gas stations, trees, grass, weeds, houses, plastics, vehicles. So all that fire will be fed by the oxygen rushing back into the area to equalize with Earth's standard atmosphere. So now you've got a massive supply of incendiary fuel rushing back into the area. Now there will be people that suffer massive third-degree burns. There will be people trapped in rubble, serious lacerations from flying debris, flying glass. Now, will there be a fire department? We're used to help coming when we need it. We call 911 and help comes. We always know that there's like an agency or a team of people that have our back in any given situation, right? There's nothing left. There are no police, there are no fire, no EMS, no hospitals. There is no help coming. You are now subject to the intense radiation that was generated, the fires, the collapsing buildings, debris. Things are still burning, things are still collapsing. Nobody can help you. Nobody's putting out those fires. You're there in whatever situation you're left in, for better or for worse, and it won't be better for a very, very long time. Now, the blast wave that emanates from this, the light damage radius, that's enough to break windows. If you see a flash at this range, this circle, the white one that's highlighted, at that range, you're so far away from downtown, and I can tell you, because I've been in a lot of these places, that you can't even see downtown. There's too much stuff in the way, but you saw a flash, and now you go into the window to see, like, maybe you see the mushroom cloud from it. So you're standing at a window, you're standing next to a tree, you're looking that way. The blast wave is significantly slower at this range. If you're standing in front of a glass window, you're standing in front of a grenade of razor blades. That is all the way out there. I don't even have it in full frame. That's how far it is. Almost all the way to Oklahoma and Gene Snyder. So there will be a lot of injuries from that. Now, this is fallout. And that's another problem. It's a longer term problem. What we call fallout is the stuff that was inside the blast radius, the buildings, the dirt, the asphalt, anything that was there and got ground up by that blast wave or burnt by the thermal pulse is now dust, except the radiation generated by this detonation, this massive release of energy, has contaminated all of that dust. How much dust do you think is inside of one house? How, if you were to take a house and ground it up into dust-sized particles, how much dust would that be? Be a lot. So any ground up pulverized houses, for instance, that's all radioactive dust. And that stuff got blown outwards by that massive pressure wave and in a huge radius, right? Because if you get a pressure wave that's big enough to break windows, then it's carrying dust. That's fallout. It's the remnants of what was there. Now that stuff will be carried by, it's going to be blown up into the jet stream. Not just outwards, right? It's going to be sent upwards too. and it rains down. And eventually it'll get too heavy for air and it'll come down, or it could conjoin with moisture in the atmosphere and come down as rain, or radioactive rain, or just ash, if it failing that. In some areas it will be worse than in other areas. You can see this in Chernobyl. Like, some areas just inexplicably have higher radiation than other areas, and you're thinking to yourself, we're nowhere near the reactor. Like, how'd that happen? That's fallout, because fallout fell in more in one place than it did in another, just because of the wind, the pressure densities at the time, and on the atmosphere, on the ground, just all the different factors. It's just a lot of variables that go into it. But some spots will be way more radioactive than others, and it will contaminate the water, contaminate the soil. Anything that's outside will have this dust land on it, including the ground. So you're not outside at the time when it's raining down. Later on, when you go outside, you're kicking up dust that landed on the ground. You're touching things outside. Maybe you open a car door. How much snow falls when you open a car door after a heavy snowfall? A lot. Now imagine it's not snow, it's not wet, it's dust. Just poofs everywhere, right? And then you breathe it in. Okay, you're breathing in radioactive dust. So you're dead at that point. You've gotten a lethal dose. That's fallout. You can't eat it, you can't breathe it, you don't want it on you, you don't want it in your pores, because some of it will be fine enough to get into your pores. So that's where the radiation, the Tyvek white radiation suits, the gas mask covering your shoes, that's where all that stuff comes in, and that's what we'll be doing just to go outside. So, is this the world you want to live in? Is Ukraine worth this? Because this is what it turns into. So all of you stupid people out there that are spouting off and virtue signaling about how we should go to war against Russia for Ukraine, it ain't worth this. And if this scares you, guess what? It fucking should. Anything in this situation, you're gonna die of cancer eventually. You can't keep out all the radioactive dust. You will eventually die of cancer. 20 years maybe. You get a lethal dose, you got about a week. Radiation sickness, there's no way you want to die. Your organs liquefy while you're still alive inside of your body and start leaking out of you. Your skin begins to burn and melt off. That's radiation sickness. The radiation burns your cells and destroys them so that there's no cell wall anymore. Your organs have no containing fat around them. Everything melts because you're being burnt from the inside out. If that sounds like it hurts, it does. Ask the sailors that were on the Widowmaker, the K-19, the Russian sub. Many of them died as a direct result of radiation poisoning, and it was a horrible death. Ask the guys at Fukushima. Ask the guys that served at Chernobyl. The first responders. Ask them about radiation poisoning. You can't. They're dead. Ask the people that were there with them, and they'll tell you it is a horrible way to die. You're being burned alive from the inside out, and nothing can put it out. So take a breath, step back from the table, and think.